Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some more fascinating ideas?
Always.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul.
Oh, a classic.
It is. We're focusing on his concept of the archaic man.
The idea that even with all our modern advancements, something of the primitive still lingers within us, right?
Exactly. We're going to explore how traces of primitive thinking still exist within our modern minds.
I'm intrigued.
I think there's some real potential for aha moments here.
I'm ready. Let's dive in.
So, when we talk about the archaic man, what exactly do we mean? It's not like we're suddenly going to turn into cavemen.
Right. It's not about that. It's more about recognizing that part of us operates on a logic that's not strictly rational or scientific,
Like a different way of processing the world.
a more intuitive, instinctual way.
I can see that. Can you give me a real-world example? Something that illustrates how these ancient ways of thinking pop up in our modern lives?
Sure. Think about this. You sneeze, and someone says, God bless you.
Yeah, we all do it. But I've never really thought about why.
Well, that simple phrase is rooted in an ancient belief that the soul could escape during a sneeze.
Wow, I never knew that.
It's a perfect example of how remnants of that primitive mindset are still woven into the fabric of our lives.
Without us even realizing it.
Exactly. Jung argued that to truly understand ourselves, we need to acknowledge these archaic processes.
He even drew a parallel to our physical bodies, right?
Yes, he pointed out how our bodies still have traces of things like gills or tails from our evolutionary past.
Leftovers from earlier stages of development.
Precisely. Just like our physical bodies carry these echoes of the past, so do our psyches.
So these aren't just random quirks, but something much deeper.
Absolutely. Echoes of an ancient way of being.
That's fascinating, but also a bit mind-boggling. How can ways of thinking that seem so different from our modern rational minds actually function within us?
Well, Jung was heavily influenced by the work of Levi-Bruhl.
Another fascinating thinker.
Indeed. Levi-Bruhl developed the concept of collective representations.
Remind me what that refers to.
These are basically widely held beliefs that are taken as truth within a society, even if they don't always align with logic.
It's like a shared reality, a way of seeing the world that's passed down through generations.
Exactly. And these collective representations operate more on intuition, symbolism, and a sense of what feels true rather than objective evidence.
That makes me wonder if we haven't totally moved past this way of thinking, even in our modern world.
That's a great point. Think about it.
Yeah.
Don't we still sometimes make decisions based on gut feelings or hunches?
All the time.
There you go.
Right.
It's not that these intuitive ways of knowing are always wrong or bad.
Sometimes they can be incredibly insightful.
Exactly. But Jung emphasized that understanding how these processes work, especially how they differ from our conscious thinking, is essential for self-awareness
It's like shining a light on those hidden corners of our minds.
and seeing how they influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
This is where I start to feel a little lost. How do we even begin to unravel something as elusive as the unconscious?
Well, Jung proposed that one way to understand the unconscious is through something called psychic projection.
I've heard that term before, but could you explain it in simple terms?
It's essentially how we unconsciously attribute our own internal experiences, our fears, desires, even our power, to external forces.
So we're projecting our inner world onto the outer world.
That's the idea.
I'm still having trouble picturing how this works. Can you give me a real-world example?
Imagine a tribal medicine man who claims to catch souls in a cage.
Okay, I can see that.
To the people witnessing this, it appears his power comes from some external, mystical force.
Like magic or something supernatural.
Exactly. But Jung would argue that it's actually the medicine man's projected psychic energy that creates the effect, not just the observer's belief.
So there's a real psychic element at play.
That's what Jung believed. He saw the psyche as having its own objective reality, capable of influencing the world around us.
That's a powerful idea.
It is. And this concept of projection helps explain a lot of phenomena, from belief in spirits and sorcery to the idea of the mana personality.
Individuals who seem to possess a supernatural aura of power or influence?
Precisely.
This raises a big question for me. If we're projecting these powerful forces outward, does that mean our psyches are formed by external projections? Or is it more of a two-way street?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of a long-standing debate in psychology. Is the psyche primarily formed from within, or is it built up from external influences that we absorb over time?
Nature versus nurture, in a way.
You could say that Jung used a great analogy to explore this. He compared the development of the psyche to the development of the body.
Interesting comparison.
Think about how our physical bodies are built from inherited elements, a kind of blueprint passed down through generations.
Our DNA.
Exactly. Jung suggests that our psyches also have these inherited elements, including those archaic processes we've been discussing.
So there's a kind of ancient blueprint within us that influences how we experience the world, like an echo of our evolutionary past.
You got it.
It's fascinating to think about how this compares to the modern materialist perspective.
How so?
Well, materialism also views the individual as a product of external forces.
Shaped by our environment and experiences.
But it doesn't typically acknowledge this unique internal element like the mana personality that the primitive mindset often allows for.
That's a great observation. It highlights a key difference in how these two perspectives understand the individual.
And it seems like Jung's perspective offers a more nuanced view, recognizing both the influence of external forces and the power of something deeper within us.
Definitely. It's a more holistic approach that acknowledges the complexity of the human psyche.
So, did Jung offer any guidance for navigating this complex interplay of internal and external forces? Did he propose a way to understand how they interact within us?
He did. Jung outlined 4 distinct stages of psychotherapy: confession, explanation, education, and transformation.
4 stages.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Imagine them like reaching different summits on a mountain. Each stage feels final, in a way, because it addresses a fundamental truth.
Like a major breakthrough.
Exactly. But ultimately, all 4 stages coexist and are needed for a complete understanding.
They work together to paint a fuller picture.
Exactly. So first we have confession, which involves acknowledging those hidden shadow parts of ourselves.
The parts we tend to hide or deny.
Right. Then we move to explanation, where we try to understand the roots of our struggles.
Getting to the why behind our behaviors and patterns.
Exactly. Next comes education, where we actively work to change those behaviors.
Putting our insights into action.
Yes. And finally, there's transformation. A deeper shift in our being, not just our actions.
So it's about more than just fixing surface-level problems.
It's about a profound shift in perspective and understanding.
I like that earlier you mentioned that Jung saw this need for self-understanding as arising from a crisis. What kind of crisis was he talking about?
Well, Jung observed that the emergence of psychology as a field was itself a symptom of modern man's spiritual crisis.
A crisis of meaning.
You could say that he theorized that this crisis arises from a blockage of psychic energy, because traditional religious systems are no longer offering adequate outlets for many people.
So it's like we're hardwired for a certain kind of meaning-making, but the old ways of finding it aren't working for everyone anymore?
That's a great way to put it.
It makes sense if you think about it. Our world has changed so much in recent centuries, but our basic human needs haven't really changed all that much.
Definitely. We're still searching for meaning, purpose, and connection.
So if traditional religion isn't filling this need for a lot of people, where are they turning? What's filling that void?
Jung observed that people were turning to various things in the absence of those traditional outlets, things like the occult, theosophy, and even psychoanalysis itself.
Really?
It's like we're instinctively seeking something that transcends the purely material world, and we're willing to explore all sorts of paths to find it.
That's fascinating. It speaks to this deep human longing for something more.
Absolutely.
This brings us back to the idea that we have these deep, possibly spiritual needs that aren't always being met by the purely rational, materialist worldview that dominates modern society.
You're right on the mark. Jung believed that many neuroses, those anxieties and mental struggles we all experience from time to time, stem from this very lack of meaning in life.
It's like our souls are starving for something more, and when we don't feed that hunger, we end up feeling lost and unfulfilled.
Exactly. He often shared the story of a patient who said, "If only I knew that my life had some meaning and purpose, then there would be no silly story about my nerves."
Wow, that really drives the point home.
It shows how deeply this lack of meaning can impact our well-being.
It's not just a philosophical issue, it can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
So it seems like exploring these deeper levels of ourselves, including those archaic processes, isn't just an intellectual exercise.
Right. It's about addressing a fundamental human need that often gets overlooked in our fast-paced modern world.
A need for meaning and connection.
Exactly.
But how do we balance this need for meaning, this exploration of the spiritual side of ourselves, with the very real scientific materialist world we live in?
It's a great question. It's a tension that many of us grapple with. Can those two things even coexist?
That's the challenge. Jung believed they could and should coexist.
He firmly believed that psychotherapy needed to find a way to balance those scientific materialist explanations with those deeper spiritual considerations.
It's about recognizing the full spectrum of human experience, not just focusing on one aspect over another.
That makes a lot of sense. But I imagine finding that balance is easier said than done.
It is a delicate balancing act.
So how did Jung propose we approach this? How do we find that balance?
Well, he believed the key was to recognize the objective reality of the psyche.
What do you mean by that?
He saw the psyche as having its own laws and influences, just as real and impactful as the laws of physics or biology.
So it's not just some abstract concept, it's a real force. Precisely. And he believed we need to acknowledge the role of spiritual influences alongside the physical aspects of our being.
It's not about choosing one over the other, but recognizing the interplay between both.
Exactly.
This is giving me a lot to think about. It seems like a much more nuanced and holistic way of approaching psychology and personal growth than what we often see in our modern world.
It certainly is. It's about embracing the complexity of what it means to be human, recognizing both the scientific and the spiritual as valid aspects of our experience.
It's about seeing the whole picture, not just focusing on one piece of the puzzle.
Well said.
Wow, this is a lot to digest. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Jung's ideas.
Oh, definitely. There's so much more to explore.
There's a lot more to unpack here.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back and ready to go even deeper into Jung's ideas about the archaic man.
Sounds good to me.
Last time, we talked about how even in our modern world, those traces of primitive thinking are still with us.
It's a fascinating idea, but it's also a bit abstract.
It is. How does this actually play out in our lives? What are the real-world implications of carrying this ancient inheritance within us?
Well, one of the most significant implications is how those archaic processes often express themselves symbolically.
Symbolically.
Yeah, Jung believed that symbols are like the language of the unconscious.
That's interesting. It's like our unconscious is trying to communicate with us, but it's not using words.
Exactly. And these symbols can offer valuable insights into those deeper parts of ourselves that we don't always have conscious access to.
So it's not just about uncovering these ancient instincts, but about learning to understand what they're trying to tell us.
Exactly. You have to learn to speak the language, so to speak.
That sounds like a challenge.
It can. Jung was particularly interested in dreams,
Dream.
He saw them as a primary way that the unconscious communicates with us through symbols.
So he didn't believe that dreams are just random neural activity.
Not at all. He saw them as meaningful messages from those deeper layers of the psyche.
So there's a reason those strange symbolic dreams can feel so significant.
Exactly. They're not just nonsense.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of how we talked about the spiritual crisis of modern man.
How so?
Well, if traditional religion isn't providing a framework for that kind of symbolic exploration for some people, maybe dreams can offer an alternative way to connect with those deeper aspects of ourselves.
That's a really insightful connection. Jung believed that dreams offer a powerful space for personal growth and self-discovery.
Like a window into our unconscious.
Exactly. It allows us to tap into a wellspring of wisdom that lies beyond our everyday awareness.
So by paying attention to our dreams, we can learn more about ourselves and maybe even find some guidance for our lives.
You got it. And Jung believed that by understanding and integrating these unconscious messages, we can find a sense of meaning and purpose.
That makes sense. It's like we're tapping into something larger than ourselves, something more profound. This brings us back to Jung's idea that many of those anxieties and mental struggles we experience, those neuroses, often stem from a lack of meaning in life.
It's a recurring theme in his work.
Do you think there's a link between our modern disconnect from the spiritual realm and the rise of these struggles?
Jung definitely saw a strong connection there. He argued that when we lose touch with those deeper sources of meaning, our psychic energy kind of stagnates.
Like it's blocked or trapped.
Yeah. And that can lead to those feelings of anxiety, depression, and emptiness you mentioned.
It's like our souls are starving for something more, something beyond just the material world.
That's a great way to put it.
If we don't find a way to feed that hunger, we end up feeling lost and unfulfilled. So how do Jung's ideas about the archaic man help us address this?
That's where his concept of the collective unconscious comes in.
Right. We touched on that briefly last time, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on the details.
Now, remember how we talked about the psyche having both a personal and a collective aspect?
Yeah.
Jung believed that the archaic man isn't just an individual phenomenon.
Meaning it's not just about our own personal past echoing within us.
Right. It's something much bigger than that.
Right.
It connects us to a shared human experience that goes beyond time and culture.
It's like we're all connected at a much deeper level.
Exactly. We share a kind of universal inheritance.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So Jung saw this collective unconscious as a vast reservoir of what? Wisdom, experience.
Exactly. It's the source of those archetypes, those universal patterns of thought and behavior that shape how we understand the world.
You're going to have to remind me what archetypes are again. I always struggle with that term.
No problem. Think of them as those universal, primal patterns that are embedded in the human psyche.
Like blueprints for common human experiences.
Precisely. Things like the hero's journey, the mother figure, the wise old man, the trickster.
Those recurring themes that pop up in stories and myths from all over the world.
Exactly. And because these archetypes are rooted in the collective unconscious, they carry a profound sense of meaning and purpose.
So they're not just interesting stories, they're tapping into something much deeper.
They can guide and inspire us, help us navigate those challenges in life.
And connect us with something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
This is all starting to come together. By tapping into those universal patterns, we can connect with that deeper sense of meaning that Jung saw as so vital for our well-being.
It's like finding our place in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. But how do we actually access this collective unconscious? It seems very abstract.
Well, Jung observed that archetypes can manifest in all sorts of ways, from our dreams and fantasies to art, literature, and even our relationships.
So it's not just about introspection, it's about looking outward to see how those universal patterns are expressed in the wider human experience.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not isolated individuals, but part of a larger human story, a story that's filled with meaning and purpose.
It's easy to get caught up in the details of our own lives and lose sight of that bigger picture.
It happens to all of us. But Jung's ideas offer a way to reconnect with that broader perspective, to see ourselves as part of something much larger and more meaningful.
It sounds profound and empowering, but I imagine it's not always easy to make that shift in perspective. What are some of the challenges people face when trying to integrate these Jungian ideas into their lives?
One of the biggest challenges is that Jung's ideas are complex, sometimes even paradoxical. They require us to embrace ambiguity and think outside the box.
It's not about finding easy answers or quick fixes.
Definitely not. It's about a journey of self-discovery that can be both challenging and rewarding.
So it's a process, not a destination.
Exactly. And remember, Jung's ideas aren't a dogma to be blindly followed. They're a framework for understanding the human psyche in all its complexity.
They offer a different lens through which to view ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. It's about approaching them with an open mind and a willingness to engage in honest self-reflection.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of those 4 stages of psychotherapy we talked about earlier. Well, each stage feels like a major breakthrough, but ultimately they all work together to guide us toward a more complete understanding.
Right. It's about embracing that ongoing process of growth and transformation, not just trying to reach some static state of enlightenment.
Exactly. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the archaic man to the collective unconscious and the spiritual crisis of modern man.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. What would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners? What does all this mean for how we live our lives in such a complex world?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that Jung saw the unconscious as a powerful force.
Capable of great things, but also potentially destructive if not acknowledged.
Right, but by acknowledging and integrating those darker, less conscious aspects of ourselves, we can actually harness that energy for personal growth and transformation.
It's not about denying or suppressing the archaic man within us.
Not at all. It's about understanding him, learning to work with him.
Finding a way to live in harmony with those deeper forces, rather than trying to ignore or control them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the archaic man can actually hold a key to unlocking a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in our lives.
It sounds like by connecting with those deeper sources of meaning, we can move beyond the anxieties and neuroses that so often seem to define the modern experience.
And start moving toward a more fulfilling and authentic way of being.
That's a beautiful thought. But I'm sure there's still more to explore here.
There is. To explore that idea further, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into how Jung's ideas can help us understand not just our individual lives, but also those broader social and cultural trends that are shaping our world.
I'm looking forward to it. This is giving me a lot to think about. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul.
Ready to wrap things up?
We've been exploring those fascinating ideas about the archaic man and the collective unconscious.
A lot of deep stuff.
It is. Last time we were talking about archetypes, those universal patterns of thought and behavior.
Right, the hero, the mother figure, those kinds of things.
I'm still really intrigued by this idea that these ancient patterns can offer insights into our modern lives.
Jung was all about that.
But how does this actually translate into a therapeutic setting? It still feels a bit mystical to me.
It can seem that way.
Yeah.
But Jung believed that psychotherapy wasn't about getting rid of those archaic processes.
Because we're not trying to erase them.
No, it's about integrating them into a more balanced personality.
So they become part of who we are, but in a healthy way.
Exactly. He saw neuroses, those anxieties and struggles, not as illnesses to be cured.
So not something to be afraid of.
Right, more like signals that something's out of whack.
Something's off balance.
Exactly, like a warning light on your car's dashboard.
Telling us to pay attention.
So instead of silencing that signal, we need to figure out what it's trying to tell us.
What's causing the problem?
Exactly. And Jung emphasized paying attention to things like dreams, fantasies, intuitions.
This stuff we usually brush aside.
Right. He believed they're all ways that our unconscious tries to communicate.
But it's not always easy to understand what it's saying.
It's a different language, often speaking through symbols and archetypes.
Like we need a decoder ring.
It can feel that way. It's definitely a different approach than just talking about your problems.
It's going deeper.
Exactly. And Jung developed specific techniques for working with these unconscious materials.
Like what kinds of things?
Things like dream analysis, active imagination.
Active imagination.
Yeah, it's a way of engaging with those fantasies and images that come from the
This
unconscious.
sounds intense.
It can be. He also encouraged the exploration of myths and fairy tales.
I never thought of those as therapeutic tools.
Well, Jung saw them as expressions of universal archetypes, full of symbolic meaning.
So we can learn something about ourselves by studying those stories.
Exactly. It's all about expanding our awareness and recognizing the wisdom hidden within us.
Tapping into that inner wisdom.
Remember those 4 stages of psychotherapy we talked about? Confession, explanation, education, and transformation.
Yeah, like climbing a mountain.
Well, once we understand and acknowledge those unconscious forces at work,
We can start to make real changes.
right, that's where the education stage comes in.
Putting those insights into action.
Exactly. It's not enough to just have these aha moments.
We've got to actually do something with them.
Right. Jung believed this process of integration can lead to a real transformation of the personality.
Becoming more whole, more ourselves.
Exactly. It's about aligning ourselves with those deeper sources of meaning and purpose.
Finding that inner compass.
Exactly. And this transformation has implications beyond just the individual.
It ripples outward.
It brings us back to those ideas about the collective unconscious and the spiritual crisis of modern man.
Right. So how does this individual process of integration connect to the broader challenges we're facing as a society?
Well, Jung saw those anxieties and neuroses so prevalent in modern life as a symptom of a collective imbalance.
Like we're all out of sync.
Exactly. A disconnect from those deeper sources of meaning that have historically grounded humanity.
So it's not just that individuals are struggling, but our whole culture is in a tough spot.
He argued that our overemphasis on rationality and materialism,
All the stuff.
yeah, it's led to a kind of spiritual poverty.
Like a void we're trying to fill.
And that void is at the root of so many social issues.
It's almost overwhelming to think about it on that scale.
It is a big picture perspective. But Jung, while sometimes a bit pessimistic,
He wasn't always a cheery guy.
he believed the key to healing both individually and collectively lies in recognizing and integrating those neglected aspects of ourselves.
Bringing those shadows into the light.
Yeah, exactly.
So are you suggesting we all need to get back to religion? Is that the answer?
Not necessarily Jung appreciated religious traditions,
They have their place.
but he recognized that we need to find our own unique paths to spiritual wholeness.
Our own personal journeys.
He saw the rise of psychology as a sign that we're seeking new ways to understand those deeper dimensions of experience.
It does seem like we're in a time of transition.
Right. The old ways aren't working for everyone.
But we haven't quite figured out what's next.
It's a time of great potential, but also some danger.
Because we could go down the wrong path.
Jung saw it as a wake-up call for humanity,
To become more conscious.
to reconnect with those universal sources of meaning,
The things that truly matter.
to embrace both the rational and the intuitive, the scientific and the spiritual.
It's about finding that balance.
And Jung saw this expanded awareness, this integration of the archaic man into the modern psyche, as crucial for the future of humanity.
So it's not just about personal growth, it's about something much bigger.
Exactly. It's about the evolution of our species.
That's a powerful idea. Jung didn't provide all the answers.
No, but he pointed us in a direction,
Toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and our world,
a journey that requires courage, curiosity.
and a willingness to face those shadow sides.
Not always easy, but the potential rewards are immense.
It's about healing those wounds, both personal and collective.
And maybe, as Jung suggested, by exploring that archaic man within, we'll discover a connection to a source of knowledge far beyond what we currently imagine,
A source of wisdom that's been with us all along.
waiting to be rediscovered.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore those hidden depths within yourself.
It's a journey worth taking.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Carl Jung.
Until next time.
Keep those minds open and keep exploring.